I'm Sadie, 32, sitting on my creaky porch in a sleepy Ohio town. The summer air's thick, but my hands shake as I remember the day I decided to leave Marcus. My suitcase was half-zipped clothes spilling out when he stormed in, eyes blazing. "Where do you think you're going?" he growled. Fist raised, ready to strike. "Divorce. Don't even dream about it." I froze, heart pounding, until someone stepped from the bathroom, stopping him cold. Who was it? Stick around to find out. Have you ever faced a moment that broke you open? Drop a like. If you've been there, subscribe to hear how I found my way and comment where you're watching from. 5 years ago, I stood in a community center in my hometown, wearing a simple lace dress that hugged my waist. I was 27, my hair swept up in a loose bun, and Marcus, my new husband, grinned at me like I was the only person in the room. His hands were warm, calloused from his mechanic job as he slipped a plain gold band on my finger. I believed in him and us. Growing up with just my mom, who worked double shifts to keep us afloat, I craved stability. Marcus promised that. He said he'd always protect me, and I clung to those words like a lifeline. The first months were sweet. We rented a small house with peeling paint and a tiny backyard. I'd wake up early, brew coffee, and sketch at the kitchen table while he got ready for work. I worked part-time at the local library shelving books and helping kids find stories they loved. It wasn't much, but it felt like enough. I'd come home and tell Marcus about a funny kid or a new book I'd found, and he'd nod, maybe smile, but his eyes were often on his phone. I didn't think much of it then. He was tired, I told myself. Work was hard. But little things started to creep in. He'd ask who I'd talk to at work, his voice casual but sharp. If I mentioned a coworker, he'd squint and say, "Why do you need to talk to him?" I'd laugh it off, thinking he was just protective. But it kept happening. One night I caught him scrolling through my texts while I was in the shower. I stood in the hallway, towel clutched to my chest, and asked what he was doing. "Just making sure you're safe," he said, not looking up. My stomach twisted, but I didn't push. I wanted to trust him. Then came the barbecue at his parents' house 6 months into our marriage. The backyard was crowded with cousins and neighbors, the air thick with charcoal smoke and laughter. I was nervous, wanting to make a good impression. I'd spent the morning making potato salad, double-checking the recipe to get it right. Marcus had been particular about bringing his favorite beer, some craft IPA he loved. I'd packed it in the cooler, but in the rush, I forgot to grab it from the fridge. When he asked for one, I froze, realizing my mistake. I mumbled an apology, but his face darkened. "Sadie, how hard is it to remember one thing he said loud enough for everyone to hear?" Heads turned. My cheeks burned as I tried to laugh, saying I'd grab some from the house. He waved me off, muttering about how I always mess things up. His sister Renee was there, leaning against the picnic table in her sundress. She caught my eye, her expression soft, almost pitying. It made me feel smaller than Marcus's words. Later, she pulled me aside in the kitchen, handing me a glass of iced tea. "He's just particular," she said. "You'll get used to it. Don't take it personally." Her voice was kind, but it felt like a warning, like I was the one who needed to adjust. I nodded, sipping the tea, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I wanted to tell her I wasn't sure I could keep up with his expectations, but the words stuck in my throat. That night back home, I couldn't sleep. Marcus was already snoring, one arm flung across the bed. I slipped out to the attic, where I kept a few old canvases from my college art classes. The space was dusty, lit by a single bulb, but it felt safe. I pulled out a small canvas and started painting, just a simple sketch of a field I'd seen on a drive once, all golden grass and open sky. It was the first time in weeks I'd felt like myself. I hid the canvas behind a box of Christmas decorations, knowing Marcus would call it a waste of time. He'd always said my painting was childish, something I'd grow out of once I was a proper wife. The next morning, I woke up to find him staring at me over breakfast. "You were up late," he said, his spoon clinking against his cereal bowl. "What were you doing?" I lied, saying I was organizing the attic. His eyes lingered, like he didn't quite believe me, but he let it go. I went to work that day with a knot in my chest, replaying the barbecue, Renee's pity, and the way Marcus's voice had cut through the crowd. I started to wonder if I was doing something wrong if I wasn't the wife he needed. The library was quiet, and I found myself hiding in the stacks pretending to reshelve books just to catch my breath. I didn't know it then, but that was the first crack the moment I started to see the cage he was building around me. The days after the barbecue felt heavier, like I was carrying a stone in my chest. Marcus's mood swung faster now. One moment he'd be joking about a customer at the garage, the next he'd snap if I left a dish in the sink. I started tiptoeing around him, measuring my words, but it was never enough. He'd always find something to pick at. "You're too quiet, Sadie," he'd say. Or, "Why don't you ever dress up anymore?" I'd bite my lip, unsure how to answer without setting him off. I didn't recognize this version of myself, this woman who second-guessed every move. Work at the library was my only escape. I'd linger after my shift, straightening shelves, or flipping through novels I hadn't read. Books felt safe, like friends who didn't judge. I started borrowing them, tucking paperbacks into my bag to read late at night when Marcus was asleep. I'd sit on the floor by our bed, the glow of a small flashlight dancing across the pages. Those stolen hours kept me grounded, reminded me of the girl who used to dream of art school and road trips. But even that felt risky. Marcus had made it clear he didn't like me wasting time on things that weren't practical. One evening he came home late, grease smudged on his knuckles, his jaw tight. I was at the stove, stirring a pot of chili, trying to get dinner just right. His friend Nathan was with him, a loud guy with a laugh that grated on me. They slumped onto the couch, cracking open beers while I set the table. Nathan glanced at me, smirking. "So Sadie keeping the house nice and tidy for your man?" he said, his tone dripping with something I couldn't name. I forced a smile, my hands gripping the ladle. Marcus chuckled, not looking at me. "She tries," he said. My face burned, but I kept stirring, pretending I hadn't heard. Dinner was worse. Nathan kept talking, his voice booming, about how wives should know their place, how his girlfriend never steps out of line. Marcus didn't join in, but he didn't stop him either. I sat across from them, pushing my food around my plate, my appetite gone. When Nathan finally left, I cleared the table in silence. Marcus grabbed another beer and turned on the TV like nothing had happened. I wanted to scream, to ask why he let his friend talk to me like that, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I scrubbed the dishes until my fingers pruned the hot water, stinging my skin. The next morning, I met Joyce, our neighbor, while checking the mailbox. She was in her 60s with short gray hair and a warm smile, watering her roses in a faded apron. She'd wave whenever I passed by, but we'd never really talked. That day, she called me over, offering a cup of coffee. Her kitchen was cluttered, full of mismatched mugs, and a cat curled on the counter. We sat at her table and she asked how I was settling in. Something about her steady gaze made me falter. I mumbled that things were fine, but my voice cracked. She didn't push, just nodded and said, "Marriage is hard sometimes. You ever need to talk, I'm here." I thanked her, my throat tight, and left with her number scribbled on a napkin. Back home, I hid the napkin in my sock drawer, like it was a secret I wasn't ready to face. Marcus was at work and the house felt too quiet. I pulled a library book from under the bed, a poetry collection I'd been savoring. I was lost in a verse about broken wings when the front door slammed. Marcus was home early. I shoved the book under the pillow, but I wasn't fast enough. He stood in the doorway, his eyes narrowing. "What's that?" he asked, stepping closer. I stammered, saying it was just a book from work. He snatched it from my hands, flipping through it like it was evidence of a crime. "This is what you're doing, instead of cleaning the house," he said, his voice low. Before I could answer, he tore out a page, the paper ripping like a gunshot in the silence. "Stop acting smarter than you are, Sadie," he said, tossing the book onto the bed. He walked out, leaving me staring at the crumpled page on the floor. I knelt to pick it up, my hands trembling. The torn words blurred as tears stung my eyes. I didn't cry, though. Not then. I smoothed the page and tucked it into the book, hiding it back under the bed. But something shifted inside me that day. I couldn't name it yet, but it was there, sharp and restless, like a seed cracking open in the dark. 2 years into our marriage, the house felt smaller, like the walls were inching closer every day. Marcus's temper was a constant hum now, a low buzz I couldn't tune out. I'd stopped talking about my day knowing he'd twist my words into something to criticize. The library was still my refuge, but even there I felt his shadow. He'd started calling during my shifts asking when I'd be home, what I was doing, who I was with. I'd answer in whispers hiding behind the reference desk, my coworkers' curious glances burning my skin. I told myself it was normal that he just cared too much. But deep down I knew better. I tried to keep things calm at home. I'd cook his favorite meals, fold his work clothes, just the way he liked anything to avoid a fight. But it was like walking on eggshells, and they always cracked. One night he came home late, his boots heavy on the floor. I was in the living room, curled up with a cup of tea, trying to lose myself in a novel. He didn't say hello, just dropped his keys on the counter with a clatter. "You didn't answer my call earlier," he said, his voice tight. I looked up, startled. I'd missed one call during a busy shift helping a kid with a school project. I explained, keeping my tone soft, but his eyes narrowed. "You think you're too busy for me now," he said, stepping closer. I set the book down, my hands clammy. "I didn't mean to," I said, but he cut me off. "Don't lie to me, Sadie. I know you're up to something." I wasn't. There was nothing to hide, but his words made me feel like a criminal. He grabbed my phone from the couch and scrolled through it, his jaw clenched. I sat frozen, my tea growing cold, as he muttered about some coworker's name in my texts, a guy I barely knew. "You're making a fool of me," he said, tossing the phone back at me. It hit the cushion hard, and I flinched. He stormed off to the bedroom, slamming the door. I sat there for a long time, staring at the phone, my heart racing. I wanted to call someone, anyone, but who my cousin Lila had texted me a few weeks ago, worried because I'd skipped her birthday dinner. I'd brushed her off, saying I was swamped, but the truth was, Marcus didn't like me going out without him. I typed a reply to her, now my fingers hovering over the send button, but I deleted it. What would I even say? The next blow came at a rare dinner out a Friday night at a local diner we used to love. I'd hoped it would be a reset, a chance to feel like a couple again. I wore a blue dress one Marcus had once said looked nice, and spent extra time on my hair. The diner was packed, the air thick with the smell of burgers and fries. We sat in a corner booth, and for a moment things felt almost normal. He talked about a new client at the garage, and I nodded, smiling, trying to keep the mood light. But then the waiter, a young guy with a friendly grin, asked if I wanted a refill on my soda. I said yes, and we chatted for a second about the diner's famous milkshakes. It was nothing, just small talk, but when the waiter walked away, Marcus's face changed. "Who do you think you're flirting with?" he said, his voice low but sharp. I blinked, caught off guard. "I wasn't flirting," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I was just being polite." He leaned across the table, his eyes boring into mine. "Don't play dumb, Sadie. Everyone saw you." My cheeks burned as I glanced around. A couple at the next table looked away quickly, pretending not to hear. I tried to explain, but he raised his hand, cutting me off. "You're embarrassing me," he said, loud enough for the whole diner to hear. The room felt like it was closing in, the clatter of plates and chatter fading to a dull roar. I stared at my half-eaten burger, my appetite gone, my hands trembling in my lap. We drove home in silence, the streetlights casting shadows across his face. When we got inside, he went straight for the fridge, grabbing a beer. I stood in the kitchen, still in my dress, feeling like a fool for thinking one night could fix anything. "You need to figure out how to act like a wife," he said, not turning around. I didn't answer, just slipped off my shoes and went to the bathroom, locking the door. I sat on the edge of the tub, my face in my hands, trying to breathe. The mirror showed a woman I barely recognized, her eyes hollow, her shoulders slumped. I found an old photo in my purse, later one from years ago, me at a county fair laughing with cotton candy in my hand. I stared at it until my vision blurred, wondering where that girl had gone. The weeks after that diner night were like wading through mud. Every step felt heavier, every word I spoke to Marcus a gamble. I stopped reaching out to Lila altogether, my phone silent except for his calls. He'd started tracking my hours, texting me the moment my library shift ended. "Be home by 6, He'd write no explanation, just that cold demand. I'd rush out the door, my coat half on heart pounding, knowing he'd be waiting in the living room watching the clock. If I was even a minute late, he'd stand up arms crossed and ask where I'd been, his voice low and accusing. I'd mumble about traffic or a last-minute task, but his silence was worse than yelling. It was like he was waiting for me to confess something I hadn't done. I started avoiding Joyce too. I'd see her in her garden clipping roses, and I'd wave quickly pretending I was in a hurry. Her offer to talk still sat in my sock drawer, that napkin with her number now creased and soft from my fingers brushing over it. I wanted to call her to spill everything, but shame held me back. What would I say? That my husband thought I was a liar, that I was scared to come home some days. It felt too big, too real to put into words. So I kept my head down, moving through the house like a ghost trying to be invisible. Then Marcus crossed a line I hadn't seen coming. It was a Saturday morning, gray and chilly, the kind of day that made you want to stay in bed. I was ironing his work shirts, the steam hissing as I pressed the creases flat. I'd been extra careful since he'd complained about wrinkles a few weeks back. But I got distracted thinking about a book I'd read, and the iron lingered too long on one sleeve. A faint scorch mark appeared, barely noticeable, but my stomach dropped. I set the iron down, hoping he wouldn't see it. But when he came into the laundry room, his eyes zeroed in on the shirt like he'd been looking for a reason to snap. "What the hell is this, Sadie?" he said, holding up the sleeve. His voice was calm at first, but it had that edge, the one that made my skin prickle. I apologized, saying I'd wash it again, but he stepped closer, the shirt crumpled in his fist. "You can't do one simple thing right," he said. And before I could move, he grabbed my wrist, his grip tight enough to make me gasp. The ironing board wobbled as I pulled back, but he didn't let go. "You're useless," he said, his face inches from mine. My arm throbbed and I felt tears prick my eyes, but I didn't cry. He dropped my wrist and walked out, leaving the shirt on the floor. I stood there, rubbing the red mark on my skin, the room spinning. That night he acted like nothing had happened. He brought home pizza, set it on the counter, and asked if I wanted to watch a movie. I nodded, my voice gone, and sat on the couch, my arm hidden under a long sleeve. The bruise was already forming a dull purple I couldn't stop staring at when I changed for bed. I told myself it was a one-time thing, that he was just stressed. He'd apologized later, his voice soft, saying he didn't mean it, that work was killing him. I wanted to believe him, to cling to the man I'd married, but the ache in my wrist said something else. The next day I ran into Joyce at the grocery store. I was in the cereal aisle comparing boxes to avoid going home when she appeared, her cart full of vegetables and cat food. She smiled, but her eyes lingered on me like she could see through my forced cheer. "You doing okay, Sadie?" she asked, her voice gentle. I nodded too quickly, saying I was just tired. But as I reached for a box, my sleeve slipped and the bruise peeked out. Her face changed just for a second before she looked away. "If you ever need a friend, my door's open," she said, handing me a small card with her number again. I took it, my throat tight, and mumbled a thanks before hurrying to the checkout. When I got home, Marcus was in the garage tinkering with an old car part. I hid Joyce's card in a kitchen drawer under a pile of takeout menus. I didn't know why I kept it, but it felt like a lifeline, something I wasn't ready to let go of. That evening, Renee came over for dinner, her first visit in months. I'd made lasagna, hoping to keep things calm. But Marcus was in a mood, picking at the food, saying it was too salty. Renee tried to change the subject, talking about her new job, but he cut her off, snapping at me for not setting the table right. I kept my eyes on my plate, my hands clenched under the table as his voice filled the room. Renee pulled me aside, after her hand on my arm. "He's just stressed," she said, echoing her words from years ago. "You know how he gets. Just don't push him, okay?" Her eyes were pleading, like she was begging me to keep the peace. I nodded, but inside I was screaming. I went to bed that night with a plan forming, reckless and half-formed. I pulled out an old duffel bag from the closet, one I'd used for weekend trips before we married. I stuffed in a few shirts, a pair of jeans, my toothbrush. I didn't know where I'd go or how I'd pay for it, but the act of packing felt like breathing after holding my breath too long. I hid the bag behind a stack of towels, my hands shaking as I closed the closet door. Marcus was asleep, his snores filling the house, but I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering how much longer I could keep pretending everything was fine. The duffel bag sat hidden in the closet for weeks, a secret that kept me sane. Every night I'd add something new, a pair of socks, a folded sweater, my old sketchbook. It was my lifeline proof I could leave even if I wasn't ready. But the longer I waited, the heavier the air in the house grew. Marcus's eyes followed me everywhere like he could sense something was off. I'd catch him watching me fold laundry or chop vegetables, his gaze sharp searching. I kept my face blank, my movements careful, but my pulse raced every time he lingered too long. It was a Tuesday, gray and damp, when everything unraveled. I'd spent months planning, waiting for the right moment to slip away. That morning I'd called in sick to the library, my voice shaky as I lied about a stomach bug. Marcus was at the garage, or so I thought. The house was quiet, the only sound the faint drip of the kitchen faucet. I dragged the duffel bag from the closet, my hands trembling as I unzipped it. I checked its contents: clothes, a small wad of cash I'd saved from grocery budgets, Joyce's card tucked in a side pocket. My heart pounded so loud I could barely think. I was really doing this. I was leaving. I moved fast, grabbing my jacket and a water bottle, my mind racing with half-formed plans. Lila's place in Cleveland was my best bet, but I hadn't told her yet. I couldn't risk Marcus finding out. I was shoving a pair of sneakers into the bag when the front door slammed open. My stomach dropped. Marcus stood in the doorway, his work boots caked with mud, his face a mask of fury. He'd come home early, a rare slow day at the garage. His eyes locked on the bag, then flicked to me, and I saw the moment he understood. "Where do you think you're going?" he growled, his voice low, dangerous. I froze, the sneakers slipping from my hands. The room felt too small, the air too thick to breathe. I tried to speak, to say something that would calm him, but my throat locked up. He stepped closer. His fists clenched, and I backed up my hip, hitting the edge of the couch. "Put that bag down," he said, each word a blade. "Divorce. Don't even dream about it." His voice rose, filling the room, and I saw his arm pull back, his fist rising toward my stomach. Time slowed, my vision narrowing to that clenched hand, the veins bulging under his skin. I stumbled backward, my arms flying up to shield myself, but my feet tangled in the rug. I braced for the impact, my mind blank with terror. In that split second, every moment of the past 2 years crashed over me. The way he'd twisted my words, the bruise on my wrist, the nights I'd lain awake wondering how I'd become this scared, small version of myself. I wanted to scream, to fight back, but my body wouldn't move. My eyes darted to the duffel bag, its broken zipper gaping like a wound. I thought of Joyce, her steady voice telling me I wasn't alone. I thought of my mother, who'd raised me to stand tall even when she couldn't. But none of that could stop his fist, now inches from me, the air between us charged with violence. I don't know if I whispered his name or just thought it, but my voice felt lost, drowned in the roar of my heartbeat. My back pressed against the wall, nowhere left to go. I squeezed my eyes shut, waiting for the pain, when a sound cut through the haze. Footsteps quick and firm coming from the hallway. The bathroom door creaked, and Marcus's arm froze midair, his eyes widening. I opened mine, my breath caught as someone stepped into the room, their shadow falling across the floor. It was Lila, my cousin, standing there in her worn leather jacket, her dark hair pulled back tight. Her eyes were steel-locked on Marcus, and for a moment the room held its breath. I hadn't seen her in months, hadn't even known she was coming. She'd let herself in with the spare key I'd given her years ago, planning to surprise me with a visit. Now she stood between us, her presence a wall Marcus couldn't cross. "Back off, Marcus," she said, her voice steady, like she'd faced men like him before. His fist hovered, then dropped, his face twisting with shock, and something darker, like he'd been caught. I leaned against the wall, my legs shaking, trying to process her being there. Lila, who'd always been my rock, who'd helped me through my mom's death, was seeing me at my lowest. My cheeks burned with shame, the duffel bag at my feet screaming my failure. Marcus took a step back, his jaw working, but he didn't speak. Lila didn't flinch. "You don't touch her," she said, her words slicing the air. I wanted to cry to thank her, but my voice was gone, swallowed by the weight of everything. Marcus's eyes darted to me, and I saw the shift the way he turned his anger inward, calculating. "You think you can just walk out," he said, his voice low, venomous. "You're nothing without me. Nobody else would put up with you." The words hit like a slap, each one tearing at the fragile hope I'd clung to. I wanted to scream that he was wrong, but doubt clawed at me. What if he was right? What if I was too broken, too weak to start over? Lila's hand grazed my arm, grounding me, but it wasn't enough to silence his voice. He laughed, a bitter sound that made my skin crawl. "Go ahead. Run to your cousin," he said, spitting the word like it was poison. "She can't fix you. You'll come crawling back when you realize how pathetic you are." My chest tightened, my breath shallow as his words sank in. I saw every moment I'd doubted myself, every time I'd stayed quiet to keep the peace reflected in his sneer. Lila stepped forward, her voice rising. "Get out Marcus before I call the cops," she said, pulling out her phone. His eyes flicked to it, and for a second I thought he'd lunge. Instead, he grabbed his keys from the counter, his movements jerky, and stormed out the door, slamming so hard the windows rattled. The silence that followed was worse. Lila turned to me, her face softening, but I couldn't meet her eyes. I slid down the wall, my knees buckling, and sat on the floor, the duffel bag beside me. She knelt in front of me, saying my name, but I barely heard her. All I could feel was the sting of Marcus's words, the truth I'd been running from. I wasn't just leaving him. I was facing the wreckage of who I'd become. Lila's voice was steady, telling me I didn't have to stay, that I could come with her right now. But my mind was a fog, trapped in the echo of his voice calling me nothing. I clutched the bag's strap, my knuckles white, and stared at the floor, my heart, a hollow ache, no fight left in me. Lila didn't let me sit on that floor for long. She pulled me up, her hands firm but gentle, and guided me to the couch. My duffel bag stayed by the wall, its presence a quiet reminder of what I'd almost done. Marcus's words still echoed, calling me nothing, but Lila's voice cut through the haze. "You're not staying here tonight," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. I looked at her, my eyes stinging, and nodded, too tired to fight. She grabbed a blanket from the armchair and draped it over my shoulders, then sat beside me, her phone still in hand, ready to call for help if Marcus came back. We talked until the sky turned black, the living room lit only by a flickering lamp. Lila didn't push me to explain, just shared stories from her work as a social worker about women she'd met who'd left men like Marcus. One had started a bakery after years of being told she couldn't cook. Another went back to school, got a degree, and never looked back. Their stories felt like sparks in the dark, tiny glimmers of what could be. I listened, clutching the blanket, my mind churning. I wasn't those women, not yet, but Lila's words made me wonder if I could be. She asked if I had somewhere to go, somewhere safe. I thought of Joyce, her card still in the duffel, but I didn't want to drag her into this. Lila's place in Cleveland was the only real option, 2 hours away, a world apart from this house. I hesitated, my fingers twisting the blanket's edge. "What if he follows me?" I whispered. Lila leaned closer, her eyes fierce. "He won't get near you," she said. "I'll make sure of it." Her certainty was a lifeline, but doubt still gnawed at me. I'd never stood up to Marcus, never walked away. Could I really do this? The decision came slowly, like a knot untying itself. I stood, my legs shaky, and walked to the duffel. I unzipped it, pulling out the chipped coffee mug I'd packed, the one my mom gave us at our wedding. It was cracked, worthless to anyone else but to me. It was her voice telling me to be brave. I set it on the coffee table, a small act of reclaiming something mine. "I'm going with you," I said, my voice barely audible but steady. Lila nodded, a faint smile breaking through her worry. "Good," she said. "Let's get you out of here." I moved through the house like I was in a dream, grabbing only what mattered. A photo of me and Mom at the beach, my library ID badge, a pair of earrings I'd worn on my first date with Marcus back when he'd seemed kind. I left everything else, the dishes I'd scrubbed, the curtains, I'd hung the life I'd tried to build. In the kitchen, I pulled a notepad from a drawer and wrote a note, my hand trembling but sure. Marcus, I'm leaving. Don't come after me. I'm done. I didn't sign it, just left it on the counter, the pen rolling to the floor. It wasn't much, but it was the first time I'd said no to him, even if it was just on paper. As I zipped the duffel, a knock at the door made me jump. Lila tensed her hand on her phone, but it was Joyce, her face pale under the porch light. I saw Marcus peel out of here, she said, stepping inside. You okay, Sadie? Her eyes flicked to the bag, then to Lila, and understanding settled over her. I nodded, my throat tight. I'm leaving, I said the words, feeling real for the first time. Joyce's face softened and she handed me her car keys. Take my sedan, she said. It's gassed up. I'll handle things here. Her voice was steady, like she'd done this before, and I remembered her hinting at her own past, a story she hadn't fully shared. I hugged her, my arms trembling, and she squeezed me back, whispering, You're stronger than you know. I wanted to believe her, but fear still clawed at me, Marcus's voice in my head telling me I'd fail. Lila took the keys, her jaw set, and we stepped into the night, the air cool against my face. I looked back at the house, its windows dark, and felt a spark ignite inside me, small but fierce, like a match struck in the dark. Lila slid into the driver's seat of Joyce's sedan, the engine humming softly as I buckled in beside her. The street was quiet, our small Ohio town swallowed by the night, but I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, half expecting Marcus's truck to appear. Lila noticed her hand steady on the wheel. He's not coming, she said, her voice calm but firm. I nodded, clutching my duffel in my lap, the chipped mug inside pressing against my thigh. The weight of it grounded me, a piece of my past I wasn't ready to let go. We drove in silence at first, sticking to back roads, the headlights cutting through fields and sleepy neighborhoods. My phone buzzed in my pocket, Marcus's name flashing on the screen. I stared at it, my stomach twisting as the call went to voicemail. Another buzz, then another. I powered it off, my fingers trembling, and shoved it into the bag. Lila glanced over but didn't say anything, just turned up the radio. A song came on, one my mom used to hum while washing dishes, its slow guitar strumming through the car. I closed my eyes, letting the melody pull me back to a time when I felt safe, when I believed I could be more than someone's shadow. Halfway to Cleveland, Lila broke the silence. You did the hard part, she said, her eyes on the road. Leaving takes guts. I didn't feel brave, not yet. My mind kept replaying Marcus's sneer, his voice calling me pathetic. But I thought of the note I'd left, those few words scrawled on the counter, and something shifted. It wasn't just about escaping him. It was about choosing myself, even if I didn't know what that meant yet. I looked at Lila, her profile sharp against the dashboard light. Why did you come today? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She exhaled, her grip tightening on the wheel. Your text stopped making sense, she said. You sounded like a stranger. I couldn't wait anymore. Her words hit me hard, not because they hurt, but because they were true. I'd been hiding, shrinking until I barely recognized my own voice. I pulled Joyce's card from the duffel, its edges soft from being handled. I'd kept it like a talisman, a promise I hadn't dared to claim. Now I tucked it into my jacket pocket, a small vow to call her later, to thank her for seeing me when I couldn't see myself. The car hummed along, and I felt a flicker of something new. Not quite hope, but a stubborn refusal to let Marcus's words define me. My phone buzzed again, a voicemail notification from before I'd turned it off. I hesitated, then played it, keeping the volume low. Marcus's voice filled the car, soft at first, pleading. Sadie, come home, he said. I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. But then it turned, his tone hardening. You can't do this. You'll regret it. I deleted it before it finished, my heart racing but my hands steady. Lila reached over, squeezing my arm. You don't owe him anything, she said. I nodded, staring out the window at the passing trees, their branches black against the sky. For the first time, I believed her. We stopped at a gas station, the neon sign buzzing in the dark. Lila went inside to grab coffee, and I stayed in the car, the duffel at my feet. I unzipped it, pulling out my sketchbook, its pages warped from years in the attic. I flipped to a blank page and grabbed a pencil from the glove box. My hand moved before I could think, sketching the outline of a woman standing in a field, her back to the wind, her hair loose. It was me, or who I wanted to be. I wasn't an artist anymore, not really, but the act of drawing felt like reclaiming a piece of myself Marcus had tried to erase. Lila came back, handing me a coffee, its warmth seeping through the cup. She glanced at the sketch but didn't comment, just started the car. As we pulled back onto the road, my phone stayed silent, and I felt the weight of Marcus's voice lift just a little. We reached Cleveland as dawn broke the city's skyline sharp against the pink sky. Lila's apartment building was old with cracked bricks and a rusty fire escape, but it felt like a fortress. We parked and I stepped out, the duffel slung over my shoulder. Down the street, a car slowed its shape eerily, like Marcus's truck. My breath caught, but Lila's hand found mine, steady and sure. I looked at her, then at the sketchbook in my bag, and took a step toward the building, my heart quiet but resolute, like a door clicking shut. Lila's apartment was a small, cluttered haven with mismatched furniture and books stacked on every surface. I settled into her spare room, a narrow space with a twin bed and a window overlooking a noisy street. The first few days I barely left the room, my duffel bag still packed, sitting in the corner like a question I wasn't ready to answer. Lila didn't push, just left mugs of tea outside my door and kept the TV on low, a soft hum of normalcy. But normal felt out of reach. I'd wake at night, heart racing, certain I'd heard Marcus's truck outside. I'd check the locks, peer through the blinds, and find nothing but empty pavement. I started job hunting to keep my mind busy, scouring listings for library work. My old job was too far now, and I needed something close, something mine. I'd sit at Lila's wobbly kitchen table, my laptop glowing, typing cover letters that felt like lies. How do you explain a gap in your life when it's been swallowed by someone else's control? I'd pause, staring at the screen, my fingers hovering over keys, until Lila would nudge me with a plate of toast and say, "One step at a time, Sadie." Her patience was a tether keeping me from drifting too far into doubt. But Marcus wasn't done with me. A week after I'd left, I was folding laundry in Lila's living room when someone pounded on the door. My stomach lurched and I dropped the towel I was holding. Lila was at work and I was alone. I crept to the peephole, my breath shallow, and saw him, his face twisted, his fist raised to knock again. Sadie opened the door. He shouted, his voice muffled but sharp. "I know you're in there." I backed away, my hands shaking, and grabbed my phone. My first instinct was to call Lila, but I froze, remembering her stories of women who stood their ground. I dialed her instead, whispering that Marcus was here. "Stay put," she said, her voice calm but urgent. "I'm on my way. Call the police if he doesn't leave." I stood by the window, watching him pace the sidewalk, his phone pressed to his ear. He was talking to someone, maybe Renee? His words lost in the city noise. Part of me wanted to open the door to scream at him to leave me alone, but fear kept me rooted. He banged again, harder, and I flinched, my mind flashing to that moment in our house, his fist raised. But this time I wasn't cornered. I was in Lila's space, surrounded by her books and her strength. I clutched the phone, my thumb hovering over 911, when he finally turned and walked away. His shoulders hunched. I sank to the floor, my back against the wall, relief and dread tangling in my chest. Lila got home an hour later, her face tight with worry. She checked the locks, then sat beside me, her hand on my knee. "We need to talk options," she said, and introduced me to Tessa, a friend from her social work days, who was now a lawyer. Tessa came over that evening, her briefcase stuffed with papers, her eyes kind but sharp. She explained restraining orders, how they worked, what I'd need to prove. "You've got a strong case," she said, flipping through notes Lila had given her about Marcus's history. "I can help pro bono." I nodded, my throat tight, but doubt crept in. What if Marcus fought back? What if he told everyone I was the problem? I'd seen how he twisted things, how he'd made me question my own mind. I spent the next day at the library not working, just sitting in a quiet corner with a book on trauma I'd found on the shelves. Its pages were worn, underlined by other hands, and I read about cycles of abuse, about how survivors rebuild. The words felt like a mirror showing me truths I'd buried. I wrote down a single sentence in my sketchbook: "I am not his words." It was small, but it was mine, a step toward believing I could be more than the woman who'd cowered in that house. I slipped the book back on the shelf, my hands steadier, but my heart still raced at the thought of facing Marcus in court. Tessa's offer was a lifeline, but it came with a cost. I'd have to tell my story, lay bare the bruises and the fear to strangers who might not believe me. The next morning, I sat in Tessa's office, a cramped room with a single window and a desk piled with legal pads. My hands were clasped tight, nails digging into my palms as she walked me through the restraining order process. "You'll need to testify," she said, her voice steady but not soft. "Describe what he did, how it made you feel." I nodded, my mouth dry, but the thought of standing in a courtroom, my voice shaking under fluorescent lights, made my stomach churn. I'd have to say it all out loud: the wrist he grabbed, the threats, the way he'd made me feel like less than nothing. I wasn't sure I could. Tessa handed me a form, her pen tapping the page. "List every incident you can remember," she said. "Be specific." I took the pen, its weight heavy in my hand, and started writing. Each word felt like peeling back my skin, exposing something raw and ugly. I wrote about the diner, the scorch mark on his shirt, the way he'd loomed over me that last day. My handwriting wobbled, but I kept going, the page filling with truths I'd never spoken. When I finished, Tessa read it silently, her face unreadable. "This is enough," she said finally. "We'll file today." I exhaled, but relief didn't come. It was just another step, and Marcus was still out there. Back at Lila's, I tried to call Renee. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted her to see me, to understand why I'd left her brother. The phone rang twice before she picked up, her voice clipped. "What do you want, Sadie?" she said like I was a stranger. I swallowed my words, rehearsed but faltering. "I'm getting a restraining order," I said. "I just thought you should know." There was a long pause, the kind that sucks the air out of a room. "You're ruining his life," she said, her tone icy. "He's not perfect, but you're making him sound like a monster." My chest tightened, her words, a knife twisting in an old wound. I tried to explain, to tell her about the bruise, the fear, but she cut me off. "You always played the victim," she said. I hung up my hand, shaking, her accusation ringing in my ears. The mailbox held another blow. Joyce had forwarded a package from our old house, a small padded envelope with my name in her neat handwriting. Inside was my old painting, the one I'd hidden in the attic, its canvas creased but intact. A note was tucked beside it: "Found this in the garage. Thought you'd want it. Joyce." I traced the golden field I'd painted years ago, the memory of that night in the attic flooding back. It was a piece of me Marcus hadn't touched, and holding it now felt like reclaiming a breath I'd lost. I propped it against the wall in Lila's spare room, its colors bright against the peeling paint, but even that small victory couldn't shake Renee's words. The court date came faster than I expected. I wore a plain gray sweater, my hair pulled back, trying to look like someone who could be believed. The courtroom was small, its wooden benches hard under me. Marcus was there across the aisle, his face blank but his eyes fixed on me. I looked away, my hands twisting in my lap as Tessa spoke to the judge, her voice clear and firm. When it was my turn, I stood, my knees weak, and told my story. My voice broke on the word bruise, and I saw the judge's pen pause, her eyes on me. Marcus's lawyer argued I was unstable, that I'd exaggerated, and Renee took the stand, her voice steady as she said, "I'd always been dramatic, that Marcus was just stressed." Each word was a stone piling up until I could barely breathe. The judge granted the restraining order, her gavel a sharp crack in the quiet room. Tessa squeezed my hand, but I felt no triumph. As we left, I caught Marcus's eye, his expression unreadable, and a chill ran through me. Lila was waiting outside her car, idling, but I stopped short when Tessa pulled me aside. "He's rented a place 10 miles from here," she said, her voice low. "The order's in place, but stay vigilant. I knotted my throat closing and climbed into Lila's car, the world blurring outside the window. I'd won something, but it didn't feel like freedom. It felt like a shadow stretching longer waiting. I leaned my head against the glass, the painting's golden field flashing in my mind, and let the silence swallow me. 6 months had passed since the courtroom, and I was living in a small apartment in Cleveland, a studio with creaky floors and a view of a brick alley. It wasn't much, but it was mine, paid for with savings and a part-time job at a community library. The work was simple, checking out books and organizing story time for kids, but it felt like a lifeline, a rhythm I could lean into. I'd wake early, brew coffee in a cheap pot, and sit by the window watching the city stir. For the first time in years, I wasn't looking over my shoulder. I'd started taking art classes at a local rec center, a beginner's course with retirees and college kids. The teacher, a wiry woman named Clara, had a habit of humming while she critiqued our work. My first painting was clumsy, a lopsided bowl of fruit, but holding the brush again woke something in me. I'd lost that part of myself in Marcus's house, buried it under his rules. Now each stroke felt like unearthing a memory, not of him, but of the girl I'd been before, the one who dreamed in color. One evening I finished a piece for a small local exhibit, a community showcase Clara had pushed me to join. It was a simple canvas, a lone tree against a twilight sky, its branches reaching like open hands. I worked on it for weeks, mixing blues and purples until the sky felt alive. When I stepped back, I saw something of myself in it, not broken, but stretching towards something new. I hung it in my apartment, its edges curling slightly, and felt a quiet pride, the kind that doesn't need anyone else's approval. Lila and Joyce came to the exhibit, their voices loud in the crowded rec center gym. Lila wore her usual leather jacket, her grin wide as she pointed out my painting to strangers. Joyce brought a thermos of tea, insisting we share it like we were at a picnic. They stood by my side as people milled around, some nodding at my work, others passing without a glance. I didn't care. Having them there, their laughter filling the space, was enough. I caught Joyce's eye, and she winked, her face softer than I'd ever seen. "You're blooming, Sadie," she said, and I felt my cheeks warm, not with shame, but with something closer to gratitude. I'd been seeing a therapist, a woman with a low voice and a knack for asking questions that lingered. She'd helped me name the fear that still woke me some nights, the way a slammed door or a loud voice could make my heart race. I was learning to breathe through it, to let the panic pass like a storm. One session I told her about my mom, how she'd raised me alone, working late shifts at a diner, always tired but never bitter. I'd forgotten how strong she was, how she'd laugh even on the hardest days. Talking about her felt like rebuilding a bridge I'd thought was gone. One afternoon, I got a call from Gail, my mom's old friend from the diner days. She'd tracked me down through Lila. Her voice crackly over the phone. "I'm in town," she said. "Got time for coffee?" We met at a small cafe, its tables wobbly and the air thick with espresso. Gail was older now, her hair streaked with gray, but her laugh was the same, loud and unapologetic. She told me stories I'd never heard, like how Mom once danced on a bar stool to win a bet, or how she'd saved up for months to buy me a secondhand easel when I was 12. I listened, my coffee untouched, feeling Mom's presence in every word. Gail reached across the table, her hand warm on mine. "She'd be proud of you," she said, her eyes steady. "You're tougher than you think." I swallowed hard, the weight of her words settling deep. I'd spent so long feeling weak, like Marcus's voice was the truth. But sitting there with Gail's stories painting my mom in vivid color, I saw myself differently. Not whole, not yet, but mending piece by piece. I walked home that day, the city buzzing around me, and felt a stillness I hadn't known in years, like the world had slowed just enough for me to catch my breath. A few days after meeting Gail, a letter arrived, slipped under my apartment door. The handwriting was Marcus's, neat and slanted on a plain white envelope. I stood in the hallway, the paper trembling in my hands, my pulse quickening. Part of me wanted to tear it open, part wanted to burn it unread. I set it on the kitchen counter next to a half-empty mug of tea and left it there for hours, its presence like a ghost I wasn't ready to face. Finally, I slid it open, my breath shallow. His words were careful, not angry, not pleading, just a quiet apology. He said he was sorry that he was seeing a counselor, that he wanted to talk. No demands, no threats, just a request to meet to explain himself. I read it twice, then folded it back into the envelope, my hands steady, but my mind a tangle. I didn't hate him, not anymore. That fire had burned out somewhere along the way, leaving only ash. But I didn't trust him either. I sat at my small table, the city's hum filtering through the window, and wrote a reply. It was short, deliberate. Marcus, I'm glad you're getting help, but I'm not ready to see you. I need to move forward. Please respect that. I mailed it the next day, dropping it into a blue mailbox on my way to work, and felt a weight lift, not all at once, but enough to notice. Renee called a week later, her voice softer than before. I was in the library shelving books when my phone buzzed. I stepped into the break room, the smell of stale coffee thick in the air, and answered. She didn't apologize outright, but her words carried a crack, a hint of regret. I was wrong about you, she said, her pause heavy. I thought I was protecting him, but I hurt you. I listened, my thumb tracing the edge of my ID badge, and told her I understood that I didn't hold it against her. It wasn't forgiveness, not fully, but it was close enough. We didn't make plans to meet, didn't promise to talk again. Some bridges don't need rebuilding. They just need to stand as they are. Tessa sent me an update around the same time, a brief email saying Marcus's counselor had reached out to confirm he was attending sessions. He's trying, she wrote, but keep your boundaries firm. I read it on my lunch break, sitting on a bench outside the library, a half-eaten sandwich in my lap. The news didn't change anything, not really. His change was his own, not mine to carry. I deleted the email, not out of anger, but because I didn't need it anymore. My story wasn't about him now. The exhibit opening came that weekend, a small event with folding chairs and plastic cups of wine. My painting hung among others, its tree glowing under the gym's harsh lights. I stood by it, my hands clasped, as strangers wandered past. A woman in a red scarf stopped, tilting her head. She asked what inspired it, and I hesitated, then said, "It's about reaching even when you're alone." She nodded like she understood, and bought it on the spot, handing me a check with a smile. I stared at the paper, her name scrawled in blue ink, and felt something settle in me, a quiet validation I hadn't known I needed. After the exhibit, I walked home alone, the night cool and sharp. The streets were alive with laughter music spilling from open windows, but I felt apart from it, wrapped in my own stillness. I thought of my mom, how she'd find joy in small things like a good song or a sunny day. I thought of Marcus, his letter, his attempt to rewrite our story. I thought of myself standing in that gym, my painting on the wall, a piece of me shared with the world. At my apartment, I unlocked the door and stepped inside, the familiar creak of the floor greeting me. I didn't turn on the light, just stood by the window watching the city pulse below my breath, slow, my heart steady like a tide pulling back to reveal the shore. A year later, I'm standing in my studio apartment, the morning light spilling through a cracked blind. My life is small now, but it's mine. I work full-time at the library, helping kids find books and teaching an after-school art club. My days start with a walk to a corner bakery where I buy a single cinnamon roll and eat it slowly, savoring the quiet. I've learned to love these routines, the way they anchor me without weighing me down. The city hums outside my window, but I've carved out a space where I can breathe. I teach art classes on weekends, a side gig at the rec center. My students are a mix of teenagers and older folks, all of them eager to try something new. I show them how to mix colors, how to let a brush move without forcing it. Watching their faces light up when a painting comes together makes me feel like I'm giving something back, like I'm more than the woman who once hid her canvases. I keep a small sketchbook in my bag now, not hidden, just there for moments when I need to draw the world as I see it. Lila visits every few weeks, her laugh filling my apartment as we cook dinner or watch old movies. She's still my rock, but I don't lean on her as much anymore. I've learned to stand on my own, not perfectly, but enough. Joyce sent a care package last month, a box of tea and a handwritten note saying she's proud of me. I framed the note not for show, but as a reminder of the people who saw me through. I'm planning a trip to see Gail soon to sit in her kitchen and talk about my mom to keep her memory close without the ache. My apartment is full of small things that matter. A thrifted lamp with a crooked shade, a stack of library books on the table, a potted plant I've somehow kept alive. I hung a new painting above my bed when I finished late at night, a city skyline at dawn, all soft pinks and grays. It's not perfect, but it's honest like me. I've started running in the mornings, not far, just a loop around the block. The rhythm of my shoes on the pavement clears my head, makes me feel solid, like I belong to myself. I don't think about Marcus much anymore. He's a shadow that fades a little more each day. My therapist says that's progress, not forgetting, but letting go. I still startle at loud voices sometimes, but I've learned to pause, to breathe, to remind myself I'm here, not there. I've built a life from the ground up, not the one I planned when I married him, but one that fits me now. It's messy, imperfect, but it's real. The other day, I was cleaning out a drawer and found a single earring, a tiny silver hoop from our early days. I held it in my palm, waiting for the old pang of loss, but it didn't come. I set it aside, not to keep, but to let it be a relic of a life I don't live anymore. I walked to the library that morning, the air crisp, my steps light. For the first time, I felt the past settle behind me, not gone, but no longer pulling. I unlocked the library door, the familiar jingle of keys in my hand, and stepped inside, ready for the day, my heart quiet open like a page waiting to be written. Sometimes I walk to a park near my apartment, a small square with a bench under an oak tree. I sit there watching kids chase each other or old men play chess, and I think about what I've learned. It's not about winning or being right. It's about choosing yourself even when it hurts. I used to think strength was holding on through the pain, but now I know it's walking away when you need to. It's the quiet courage of rebuilding one small step at a time. I learned that from my mom, from Lila, from Joyce, from every moment I chose to keep going. I've started writing letters I'll never send, not to Marcus, but to the version of myself who stayed too long. I tell her she's enough, that her fear didn't define her, that her heart is still whole. It's not forgiveness, not exactly, but a way of letting go. I've learned to hold space for my own pain without letting it own me. That's what freedom feels like, not a grand escape, but a daily choice to live on your own terms, to trust your own voice. I think about the women I've met at the library, the ones who come in looking for books on starting over. I see myself in their hesitant smiles, their quick glances over their shoulders. I don't know their stories, but I know the weight they carry. Sometimes I slip a note into a book they borrow, just a line. You are more than your hardest days. It's small, but it's what I wish someone had told me when I was too scared to listen. We all need reminders that we're not alone, that our stories matter. The other night I painted something new, a single candle burning in a dark room, its flames steady but soft. It's not about lighting up the whole world, just enough to see the next step. That's what I've learned. You don't need all the answers, just enough courage to move forward. I hung the painting in my kitchen where I eat my morning oatmeal, and it reminds me every day that I'm still here, still growing, still mine. I don't know what my future holds. Maybe I'll keep teaching art. Maybe I'll go back to school. Maybe I'll just keep walking to that park and watching the world unfold. But I know I'm not running anymore. I'm not hiding. I've learned that healing isn't a finish line. It's a path you choose over and over until it feels like home. To anyone listening, I hope you know you're stronger than your hardest moments. You don't have to stay where you're not safe, not loved, not seen. What's one moment you chose yourself even when it was hard? Drop it in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. If this resonated, give it a like, subscribe for more, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Thank you for being here, for listening. Here's to finding your light one step at a time.